Welcome to season 2 of This Is What the Gospel Sounds Like. We are a K-pop Demon Hunters podcast where we are looking for gospel handles, not just in K-pop Demon Hunters, but other places as well. My name is Sarah Crowder. I'm a teacher at Faith Lutheran High School in Las Vegas. And with me, we have Andy Jones. Andy, tell us what's new with you. Welcome back to the Happy New Year.
Oh, I'm so glad to be doing this again, Sarah. I've missed this so much. We've been off for like 3 months, and let me tell you, this is so good for my mental health. So thank you
Well,
for
you know what? It's
wanting to
good
do
for
this
us
again.
to not be alone. And that's
Yeah,
the cry that we hear, and this is what it sounds like, is you're not alone, right? And that's
exactly.
fun for us to gather together and reminisce about what it was like watching that movie for the first time. There has been a lot. I mean, we have not recorded since Halloween. And so there's been so many events, K-pop Demon Hunter events in the last 3 months. We had crazy Halloween costumes, like so many people dressed up, and there weren't even costumes available. So that's fascinating. And then we had lots of performances. We had an NFL halftime show with Snoop Dogg. We had the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. And
hmm
do you know, I don't know, how was your New Year's Eve? Are you a big New Year's Eve celebration guy? You going out party, or what's your New Year's Eve look like?
You know, my wife and I had like a streak for like 10 years where we spent New Year's Eve in a different city for 10 straight years. But that sort of ended eventually. But we were in a different place. We were up in Oregon near Crater Lake. I went visiting that in the snow. But no,
Pretty.
I'm not a big New Year's person. Like, I don't even stay up till midnight anymore. I just go to sleep at the normal
The
times.
beauty of the West Coast is you can kind of celebrate it early on the
True.
East Coast time. And I was very excited to see Huntrix, the girls, perform for the Rockin' New Year's Eve, whatever
hmm
thing. Is
hmm
it DeClark's Rockin' or whoever's doing it now? I was so excited. And finally it comes on, and this like wave of horror. I realized I had made a miscalculation. When you think New Year's Eve, you think New York City, right? Like that's happening
uh
in New York. Huntrix was in Las Vegas performing for New Year's Eve. They were so close. I
You
was
could have
like,
gone.
how did I miss this? And it was so cool because they must have had the studio really locked down because everybody was there with their Huntrix sticks and like
Love it.
singing. There was no phones. It was just like it was such an epic performance. But did you catch any of the performances with Snoop Dogg or with any of
I
those?
caught the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade one, and that one was excellent because I think every other performer, I mean, aside from like the marching bands, every other performer had recorded music except Huntrix. And
Mm,
so like the buzz online was definitely like, why is everyone doing recordings? And I'm like, Huntrix wasn't recorded. They were
yeah.
live. So
It
that
is.
was excellent. Yeah.
It has been so great, and it's just been so much fun to see them getting the deserved spotlight for all the creative work. And I think that as we're in season 2 and we're going to talk about something different, but I do want our listeners to know you can always count on us for some K-pop Demon Hunters updates.
Yeah.
By the
News.
way, what do you think of my husband's Christmas gift? I
I'm
have a
so
roomy
envious.
jacket here.
Yeah.
I've had lots of comments. You can tell the middle schoolers were kind of like, does she know what she's wearing? And a lot of my students were
Yes.
like, that's a cool jacket. Like, that looks familiar. And I'm like, it's roomy, roomy. And they're like, oh, yes.
Yeah, so yeah, I also have my derpy shirt that my wife got me for Christmas, and
Nice.
I got this little derpy mug from our fundraiser the other day, little crab
That's
feed
funny.
fundraiser that I won this in the silent auction, and even today
Nice.
I had ramyeon for lunch, so like I'm ready to go. I'm
I
ready to
have
go.
loved that at Costco, and we just got a new H Mart, or not a new H Mart, a new 99 Ranch Market, and they have a bunch of K-pop Demon Hunters, the ramyeon, and my one of my students who's living with us, she got me the shrimp uh, crunchy chips.
Nice.
I'm a bit kind of afraid to like. I want to keep it, but I also want to try it, so I gotta try those out. So
Yeah, yeah, I
lots
gotcha.
of fun things, lots of fun things. And a shout out to our fans as well. As I'm in my classroom over Thanksgiving break, my daughter had her roommate stay with us over Thanksgiving. And they came and helped me in my classroom a little bit. And she came in, she's like, I feel like I'm in the podcast. That's because she had seen it. So I'm glad Grace got to enjoy that. And that was really fun at Thanksgiving. But Andy, we're
Yes.
not going to talk about K-pop Demon Hunters. We have all
Not today.
sorts of gospel handles in our culture. And something happened, gosh, was it December release where we both were like, we gotta talk about this. This is so, it's not even, we keep saying how K-pop Demon Hunters is a really great movie and it's really good culture point, but it's got good themes, but it's not a Christian movie. But
Mhm.
this is like really dealing specifically with faith. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, today we are talking about Wake Up Dead Man, a Knives Out mystery. So, this is the third Knives Out film that has come out. The first two came out in previous years, and I watched both of those, and those were both very good. I thought, especially the first one, was really an excellent film. It's sort of
Agreed.
a
I liked the first one more than I think the second one was too fancy for me, like, it
okay.
was right, the
I mean,
glass onion one was like
yeah,
it felt
I
I don't
like
know, I didn't connect with it as much.
I like them both. I like the second one because it had Dave Bautista, who's a former wrestler, and you know me, I'm a sucker for
Oh,
professional
the
wrestling
wrestling
people.
connection.
Anyway,
He had a
regardless,
very f it was very funny. He had, like, a really fun character. That was fun.
all that to say, I feel like the tone of the third one, all three of them are mysteries. They're all whodunits, right? Like sort of Agatha Christie style.
Mhm,
And but I think the tone of the third one was very different because it is about essentially the two main characters are two Catholic priests. And it
mhm.
deals a lot with, I think that the main question that we're going to deal with today about this film is, how do Christians and how does the church engage with the culture? Because the two main characters in this film, Wake Up Dead Man, have very different approaches to how the church is supposed to approach culture. Let me ask you a question, Sarah. How would you define culture?
Ooh. When I think about culture, I think about the things that are connected to humanity, things that are ways that we express. So, language is part of culture,
Hmm.
music is part of culture, foods, anything that humans are kind of interacting with. And part of culture is kind of a human creation. We've been created to create. And so, culture is something that humans are creating and like humans also is affected by sin. And so that makes it interesting because I think culture is a beautiful thing to learn about. I love learning languages and learning about different cultures, hosting different students in my home from different cultures. It's one of the best things about that experience. But there are times where culture can cause us to kind of pause because culture is also affected like sin just because humans are also affected by sin. So that's my quick answer. How did I do? 8 out of 10?
I think you did pretty good. Yeah, I would give you an
Great.
A, but I'm generous grader.
Okay.
But no, I think you're onto it. Like, there's a lot of things that make up culture. It's not just a singular thing. It's not just language. It's not just music. It's all of these different pieces that come into what a culture is.
Mhm.
And a lot of times we'll talk about culture as, we'll talk about Korean culture as we talk about K-pop Demon Hunters. We'll talk about American culture. But culture isn't just like nationwide or continent wide or something like that. Culture can be very localized as well. Your school has a culture, your classroom has a culture.
We talk about that all the time. And actually, in my classroom, I use this as kind of an overarching theme of how I desire my classroom culture to be calm.
Hmm.
And then I want this to be a calm space and that culture is important. And so if I ever have to explain to parents why I sent their kid out of the room, I say it's
Hmm.
precious to maintain this calm environment. And your student, threw something across the room and that's not calm. It's not the vibe. And so, that I have to preserve it by pushing that out and say, this is not what our culture is, what the climate of the room.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I got you. So when we talk about culture, we're talking about both broad and narrow, right? And so how the church engages with the culture, we're often talking more in a broad sense, the world around
Right.
us. And that can mean anything from, as you said, music to food to language to the values of the culture, what's on TV, what's in film, et cetera. It's a wide variety of things. So what we want to look at a little bit today is like the question of Wake Up Dead Man is how do we as the church engage the culture? And let me just introduce the two main characters real quick. Like we've got the main character is a guy named Father Judd. He's a younger priest with sort of a interesting past. He had been a boxer, a fighter, and that had not gone well for him. He'd claimed a man's life in the ring, and he's sort of living with that. That's sort of what drove him into the church and drove him back to Jesus. And then we've got Monsignor Wicks, who's another priest, and he is very much a culture warrior, we might label him as. He's very much the church should be fighting against the world, and Father Judd's not in that school. Father Judd is much more in the realm of the church is here to serve the world, not to fight against it. And so that's kind of the main one of the main conflicts in Wake Up Dead Man.
Before we deep dive in, if some of our listeners are talking about K-pop demon hunters, you might be wondering, should a Christian watch this show? I would advise that we follow the rating for this show, which is it is a PG-13 show. I would say this is maybe not something I would probably recommend to watch as a youth group. What do you think? As far as like if
Yeah,
you haven't watched it yet,
I would not
I
watch it
would.
as a youth group, no. There's enough
Yeah, it's
language
I
in it
think a
that would
little
be
bit more of a
inappropriate.
mature content. Yeah. I think that it's good for Christians to definitely watch this, but I would definitely keep the rating and make sure that you're I would not recommend this for like a youth group activity, just to kind of put that
No,
out there.
like,
Um,
I would recommend parents watch it with their teenagers, that's fine,
absolutely.
but not as a
Absolutely.
youth group activity, yeah.
Yeah. So this is interesting because I think that a lot of times I posted a reel of our talk from our last episode talking about K-pop demon hunters and how, that we are free to love our neighbor and that our role is not to fight but to love. And it's funny we recorded that before we see, Father Judd say, and this was really fun because I used watching this so I watched it first just regular. And then I watched it in French audio, but English subtitles. And then I watched the first half of it, French and French. And it drew my attention to the language. And one of the things Father Judd does is, it's about the cross, Jesus's love, the love of Christ, not fighting. And I kind of said a very similar thing that our job is to love our neighbor and not to fight them as a hate versus hate. It's really
Mhm,
love. And we had an interesting comment where someone was like, "Yeah, be careful because they might try to change your ways." And I was like, "Well, that's a person who really wants to isolate themselves from the world and separate themselves from the world.
mm.
I'm I don't that's not my style." And I do you think that different people in different times they might have, depending on what the culture is, different responses to the culture and how they are going to engage with it as Christians.
Mhm.
What do you think as a pastor, what do you think is the how do you know how to respond in a cultural moment?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the instinct to sort of pull away from the world and to create our own, to go the way of the Amish, if you will, and to create our own commune that is sort of separated from the world is an impulse I understand, but I don't think it's a very wise one for a wide variety of reasons. One, your witness to the world ceases once you circle the wagons like that. Now you are not able to fulfill the commission that Jesus has sent us on to disciple the nations. That doesn't exist if you are just for yourselves. But at the same time, I think like one of the books that I really appreciate about culture is this one called Culture Making by Andy Crouch. And one of the distinctions that he makes in that book is this concept of postures versus gestures. And so he has all these different ways that you can engage with culture. But sort of what he said was if you are constantly making the same gesture, and so let's say that the way that you engage with culture as the church or as a Christian is to constantly condemn culture, to just say this is bad, this is bad, this is bad over and over and over again, that becomes your posture. And it's sort of like if you do the exact same exercise with like one arm over and over again, like just the same thing, your arm's going to get like stuck. The same thing
Mm,
happens as we engage with culture. If we do the same gesture over and over again, that becomes our posture. And I think one of the biggest problems we're facing in the church today is that the posture towards culture is very much a condemning posture. It's the church is against the world, and we need to fight it, and we need to win that fight, or the church will somehow die. And that is just plain not true and also unfaithful. The church doesn't depend on us fighting as culture warriors. The church will always depend on Jesus. And so
Mm,
that doesn't mean, though, and this is the hard part, that doesn't mean there isn't a time to say this is wrong, this is evil, and to stand up to something in culture. But it's not the only thing we do. There are other
yeah.
things that we do to engage with culture.
Mm. When you said that about pulling away, I can't help my brain lives in the 16th century.
Hmm.
So much of the 16th century during Martin Luther's time, he started out as a monk, and there was a lot of cloistered monks who are trying to live like this holy life. And there was this in the culture of the 16th century in Germany, there was a big divide between what is considered to be like sacred and then what was considered to be kind of, regular people. And so you had this really structured social status, and that people would kind of outsource, spiritual things a lot to the monastic orders. And one of Luther's big drives that I really resonate with what he was doing, and I want to kind of do that in my own life, is he had experienced such joy in this kind of communal, supportive
Hmm.
environment of the monastery, but he wanted that to go out to all people. That
Hmm.
the church, the wide church, the priesthood of all believers would go out into the culture and share this light of Christ in all communities. So not limited to just those who are taking vows of celibacy and making these vows to be like this special holy person, but no, all of us in the body of Christ, all of us in the priesthood of believers now are in our homes and in our communities being servants of God in these places. And I feel like I like that. Like, I like that kind of thinking of engaging with culture as a Christian, but as a servant more than an accuser or a fighter.
Hmm.
Luther had fighting words, but I think he wanted for people to hear the gospel of Jesus, and he was really willing to make that his message that he wanted to go out for all people?
Hmm. For sure, for sure. And Luther's an interesting case study because, as you said, he has plenty of times where he is against the culture, but he also has plenty of times where he is seeking to change the culture, and in ways that we have, sort of foregone in recent years.
Mhm.
I forget what it was called, but he had like a community chest, like to help the poor,
Yeah.
and he was very much into like, let's make sure that the poor are taken care of in our town. Like this is something that we should all be involved in, and seeking to sort of transform his own city and his own town in order to be more accommodating and helpful to people who are not doing well.
The reality of the Reformation era is that the culture that Luther's trying to reform is church culture.
Yeah, exactly. And that's
You know,
sort of
he
what makes it
he's
difficult to
trying
talk about.
to change the way the church is. He thought there would be systems in place that they could maybe do a council and they could kind of get this kind of set right again and get back to scriptures and
Hmm.
with all of that kind of humanistic learning that he's trying to get back to what scripture is actually saying. When he realized that there's just there was just some real brokenness at that time where they are ignoring the scriptures and holding on to power, and Luther's like, I'm gonna stand on the word of God, and the word of God, and I can do no other. And yeah, so that's interesting. What is culture? It's not always just the world. Sometimes it can be the culture of the church too. And I think that's what Judd is fighting against, is the culture of this church, where you have with Monsignor Wicks someone who not only hates the world, but he hates his parish as well. And Judd is really upset about this because he wants to encourage them in
Hmm.
the love of Christ. And instead, they're building up this kind of, it's so focused on power. And that
Hmm.
really was clear to me in French. I think it's this, I feel like I need to watch it again in English because now I'm not sure what the English was. But the idea of castle, fortress, and fight, all of
Hmm.
these kind of very, I would say, macho kind of fighting, digging in, and even the writer guy who
Ryan
let me
Johnson?
s y no, no, no. Yes,
Oh, you're talking about the
yeah, I'm
writer in the
talking about the
show. Yeah,
character
sorry.
who
Yeah, yeah.
was yeah, Lee Ross. He was the f science fiction guy that has a moat around his house, like, he's entrenched in his home.
Mhm.
This is what he wanted. He wanted to divide his congregation against the world, and he also wanted to divide his congregation against each other. And the part that really drove me nuts was how he would attack the visitors. And I was like, I've always been like in churches that would be accused of being like too seeker friendly. And so it's kind of part of my DNA of like church is a place that people should feel welcome. And he's like literally like salivating for the walkout by offending people. I'm like,
Yeah,
no me
and
gusta.
what Father Judd says about that in the show is essentially when that happens, when Monsignor Wicks makes someone walk out during his sermon, the rest of the people who are there have to now choose a side. He's intentionally being divisive. Either choose the person who just walked out or choose me. And that's really the power dynamic uh, that's at stake with the culture of this particular parish. And so Judd's not just dealing with the church and the world, he's also dealing with the culture of this church is just completely messed up and toxic.
Yeah.
And you can tell how messed up it is in like one of the scenes where he tries to hold like a prayer meeting without Monsignor Wicks. And it's just like the regulars and him, and they're just like, this isn't an official church function. Like this is some secret meeting. And that's just how toxic this place was. Clearly Father Judd is just frustrated with this, and eventually gets to the point where he feels like he doesn't have to fight against the world, but he does have to fight against Monsignor Wicks to prevent him from just ruining these people's spiritual lives. And then everything goes completely haywire after that. But yeah.
What were your I'm curious as we're looking at these two pastors.
Hmm.
What hit you as you were viewing this,
Hmm.
looking at these pastors and how they were approaching culture and stuff? Like what just or even in the story itself? Because that to me, as much as it's culture, and I don't think I'm too and this is not spoiler free. So I think we should feel free to go forward.
I mean, the title of the film is Wake Up Dead Man. We
Yeah.
know there's going to
Yeah.
be something, right?
But I'm just curious because the beginning starts with the story, and we get Blanc comes in, and he's kind of wants to get the story of the murder, but there's
Hmm.
also the story of faith. And I think that Ryan Johnson, the director and writer, is doing something really interesting with how meaningful this story is. And so I'm just kind of curious, Andy, what as a pastor watching this, were there any moments that you were like, that feels really true, or that feels like that was a really cool moment as a pastor? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about this with a subsequent episode, I think, but the moment that struck me the most was when Father Judd is calling the construction company to talk about the crypt, right? And he's on the phone with this receptionist, and she reveals to him like this horrible conversation that she had with her mother who has dementia, and they like are fighting together, and she's crying on the phone. And, at this point in the film, Father Judd is like kind of done being a priest. Like he doesn't think he's supposed to do this. Like it's just kind of a mess. But everything just sort of stops in that moment. And he takes the phone call, closes the door to his office, and talks to this woman, prays for this woman. And it's one of the honors, I think, of being a pastor is that some people will not ever talk to you if they know you're a pastor because they're just sort of they don't want to talk to a pastor about anything. But some people they are willing to share with you their deepest stuff immediately because they trust I don't know the profession, they trust the office, they trust someone who's in that role. And I think every pastor I know has probably had a very similar conversation to that one with a complete stranger where they unburden themselves and you are there for this person and you help them through whatever that is. And it's hard because I do a lot of things in my ministry. but some of the best things are done amongst strangers and not necessarily amongst
Really?
my congregation. Like, I'll give you an
Hmm.
example. Right before Christmas, it's Christmas, it's Advent, it's like the top two busiest times of year for a pastor. And I got a phone call from hospice asking if I could go and visit someone that I don't know this person and sort of do our version of last rites for them because he's not going to make it much longer. And I go there and I do the service. It's just me and this guy, and he's asleep. He's on his like comfort care for hospice, and he's not going to wake up and say anymore at this point. It's just the two of us. His family wasn't able to be there, and I just sat with the guy. Prayed for him, commended him to the Lord, and went home. And that was the best thing I did in the month of December. Like, honestly, not not because of, I don't know, not because it was miraculous in any way, but just because that's what this guy needed, even if he had no idea it was happening. And so ministry to strangers is part of the job, and it's one of the more interesting parts of the job. So that's definitely the scene that stuck with me.
In our class this week, we're reading John 20 and talking about John's purpose of the Gospel of John. And we've been talking about how sometimes people think that the purpose of the New Testament or of Christianity is to have like these new rules of how to live this kind of Christian life.
Hmm.
But it really is about that life and death moment that we can show up at a hospice situation in the face of death and speak truth and offer actual gospel comfort in
Hmm.
Christ because that's been given to us. And so just thinking about what the gospel sounds like in this movie is the words of love that we have to share in Christ with people as they're going through a dark moment like that. That's powerfully good as a way of not fighting, but as bringing comfort, care to people in a hard time. What a what a blessing that is to actually have something to say in that moment. Because I don't know how people face death without that hope that we have in Christ in his death and resurrection and that what that means for the believer and the promising words that we can share with people. That's awesome. And oh, that's awesome. I'm just thinking you were talking earlier about how Monsignor Wicks engages with culture and how Father Judd deals with culture. And this drawing a line in the sand. How does how does Jesus deal with culture? Like when we're thinking about like gospel handles, what's the posture that Jesus takes?
Yeah, that's a good question. He does a lot of things, right?
He
He
does.
he's I think his posture is very curious. Jesus asks well over 100 questions in his ministry, right? He's constantly curious about people. And he's also like, he also understands his purpose, right? He's come to heal and to proclaim the good news to the poor. And when he meets people in need of healing, he heals them. I think about the right before the feeding of the 5,000 miracle, like there's this line about like Jesus and the disciples are like trying to get away. They're trying to get away to get a rest, and all the people follow them. But then there's this line where Jesus is like, he has compassion on the crowds because they're like sheep without a shepherd. And he spends the entire day healing them. And then the feeding of the 5,000 happens. So I think his way of dealing with culture is very much to engage with them, to help them, to transform them, to change them. But there are also times when he calls the thing what it is, when he tells the
Yeah.
Pharisees, you search the
Whitewashed
scriptures
tombs
and you're
because yeah.
supposed to know they're about me and you just don't even see it. So he engages people exactly the way they need to be engaged. And one of the problems that we face with engaging culture is that we aren't perfect. We're not Jesus, and
We are not.
we can follow his example to some degree, but I can't heal anybody. I can't cast out a demon as far as I know. So it's a little more complicated for us to try to follow his example. It's much more for me a matter of trusting that he's got me and his promise to be with me is true regardless of what culture I am in. So
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately If we're thinking about you're talking about the postures,
Mhm,
I think Judd calls it that, it's this, the arms outstretched, not this.
mhm,
That if we're going to love one another, it's gonna look sacrificial,
mhm.
and it's gonna look like caring and curiosity of our neighbor, and actually being able to call them by name. It's one of my favorite things Jesus does is he knows and calls out people by their names. And for our listener, this includes you, that you are known by Jesus and loved by Jesus, and that the gospel sounds like maybe you've been carrying a lot of burden of hate and anger and you're frustrated. Jesus welcomes you and loves you, and good news for you is that you are beloved of God and a child of God and can receive forgiveness. Even in the face of all sorts of guilt that we might carry, we have the good news that we can have forgiveness. And I think we should talk more about this phone call. Should we do another episode of season 2 talking about this confession and absolution?
I think so, yes,
All
by
right,
all
let's
means.
do it. Awesome. Well, stick around and we are going to talk more about what the gospel sounds like in the movie Wake Up Dead Man.